Right. Well, we have been in this very interesting series through this whole semester. I think almost all of you are familiar with that, with the um, Asking for a Friend series. And just by way of a reminder, that has been a really interesting series of diving into lots of questions that many or all of us wrestle with when it comes to thinking about life and faith and the church. Those are complex things. They're difficult things. And as if you were around at the beginning of the semester, you remember that we had a time to put in a lot of our questions, and a lot of the questions that came in were similar or related to many of the questions that we've hit throughout the semester. And also, as you know, it's difficult to dive into everything, and it's difficult to even dive into all the nuances of the questions that we do hit through the weeks. But we're really thankful to Jenny for stepping up to the last 2 weeks, and that's made for some great ongoing conversation. And I hope that that was meaningful to you to be in those things with her these last 2 weeks. So tonight we get to hit an interesting one, and we get to preface this with that we know that there's a general wisdom out there that there are two things that you don't talk about, right? And we say that that is religion and politics, right? And why do we not talk about those two things? Because no two people on earth can agree when it comes to either one of those things. But we already talk about religion. It's kind of what we do. So I say, well, we might as well do politics, as hairy a subject as that is. And that is because of this. There is actually a really important question out there, and it goes like this. Do I have to be a fill in the blank to be a Christian? Now, we have put out there on all the social media, do I have to be a Republican to be a Christian? And that's a question, right? And why does this question exist? But we know that that question can come in many, many different forms, right? It doesn't have to be Republican. You can just put in whatever is in that blank, because there are people who will tie whatever ideology or political stance or that is to their faith, and saying that if you are a Christ follower, if you are a disciple, right, then you will necessarily be this. And why does that question exist? Well, you know that in our world, religion and politics have become closely intertwined. We see it every day. We experience it. Some of us even participate in discussions like that. Now, for some of you, you're probably thinking that this is a ridiculous question, especially, do I have to be a Republican to be a Christian? Because you are not a Republican or fill in the blank, and you consider yourself a perfectly legitimate Christian. Well, that's good, and that's great. And I'm very glad that you're in that place. And that seems fine until you're sitting across the table with someone who's been very suspicious of Christianity, but has had a slow and growing interest in it, and who asked you straight to your face, literally, this question: do I need to be a Republican to be a Christian? Because if that's the case, I can't in good conscience accept that. Now, this has been literally the case, to sit at the table with the coffee and get asked that question. Now, why was he asking that? I think most of us probably have a concept of why, right? Because in this world, most of the Christians that he had experienced in his life, not being connected with church or the religious world or Christians as a whole, Most of the people that he had experienced were also outspoken in their conservative political beliefs and had tied their faith very closely to that. Right? And that's not a comment on anybody in here who is conservative. Many of you are, right? But he had seen how closely those things had been linked, and how the being identified with one was also necessarily identified with the other. Okay, so we have to work on that because it's a serious question and a real question that is out there. Okay, so the other way to ask this is, does Jesus promote a political agenda? Okay, so we say, well, if we have that question, what does Jesus say about politics in the Bible? Now, I want you to know, I have carefully researched this painstakingly, hours and hours and hours, and I have compiled a comprehensive list of everything Jesus said regarding politics, and I have it with me right here. It's kind of nothing, a lot of nothing. Right. Now, what do we do with that? Now, you're probably out there and you're probably saying, well, he got close. And I would say, yeah, you're right. Okay. So let's look at maybe about as close as he got to talking about politics. And this is actually really important. So I want us to look at this. This is from Matthew 22. Now, if Matthew 22 might be familiar to you, it's our same chapter as our mission. Right? So it says this, then the Pharisees went out and laid plans to trap him in his words. They sent his disciples to him along with the Herodians. Teacher, they said, we know that you are a man of integrity and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are, buttering them up. Tell us then, what is your opinion? Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? But Jesus, knowing their evil intent, said, you hypocrites, why are you trying to trap me? Show me the coin used for paying the tax. They brought him a denarius, and he asked them, whose image is this, and whose inscription? Caesar's, they replied. Then he said to them, so give back to Caesar what is Caesar, and to God what is God's. When they heard this, they were amazed. So they left him and went away. Now, let's work on this just for a minute. Jesus' response was to not get trapped into giving them the answer they were looking for. Because we know the answer they're looking for, right? That was to hear him resist the Roman occupation in Judea by not paying taxes. That's what they wanted to trap him into saying, because if he had given them this answer, they would have used it against him as a reason to have him arrested by reporting him to the governor. It would have been an open and shut case against him to get him out of their hair. But the context of this is really, really critical, though. Okay? So Jesus basically sidestepped the question by saying, if it's this person's, give it to him. If it's this person, give it to him. If it's Caesar's, give it to Caesar. If it's God, give it to God. So they couldn't really do a lot with that. But you know what I do, and that is what could have been said, what could have been done. And that helps us to understand what was said and what Jesus had every reason to be a political activist. Okay. Now that's a really important point. Jesus had every reason to be a political activist. And this is actually what his followers wanted him to be. They were desperate for him to be a political activist. And Jesus even had an apostle that was a member of one of the most forceful political groups among the Jews. And who was that? It was Simon the Zealot. The Zealots were absolutely insane about getting the Romans out of Israel. Right? And even the Messiah was going to be the new king of Israel that would deliver them out of occupation and back to freedom and peace. So even the idea of the Messiah was a political figure that would be bringing political and social freedom to the Jews. There was nothing the Jews hated more than the occupation that they were undergoing by the Romans. That was a political and military operation. Everything about that is political. Jesus had no better way to establish credibility as a teacher and as the potential Messiah than to start gathering resistance against Rome and restore Israel. If he had been a political leader with the kind of power that he had as the Son of God, he could have given everything that the Jews wanted politically, and he would have been the most powerful political leader that ever lived. This would have guaranteed him an audience in his life that loved him and amassed great power and appeal for himself. So Jesus had every reason to be interested in politics. However, this is the rub that it comes when it comes to Jesus and politics. Everything he taught was about not getting power and using power, but letting go of power. Because what is politics? And this is not a slam on politics. This is the realistic world of politics. Politics is about gaining and using power towards an agenda. That's what politics is. Okay. Jesus taught more of the other and less of the self. Right? And if you've been around LFC any amount of time, you know what this is the definition of, that we say all the time: more of the other and less of the self. That's describing love, right? More of the other, less of the self. Jesus said, love your enemies. Let go of the power you need to defeat those who are against you. What did he say? If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. This is the agenda of Jesus. Is this how our political culture functions? Could it function if it was like this? I want you to be on your guard when it comes to the intertwining of politics and socio-political agendas. Because when somebody or a group or a political or a social movement claims that God is on their side, no matter who they are or where they are on the political or social spectrum, or that they represent God's will, or that if you are a true Christian, you will subscribe to the ideologies of that group, be very, very wary of that, okay? And I say be wary of that because we see it across the political spectrum. And we get to pick on Republicans a little bit tonight because we see a lot from that world and it's very apparent, but it exists everywhere, right? I see it everywhere. even from the most liberal minds and most liberal people who are just as quick to claim Jesus as their backer as any conservative person, right? If you're a true follower of Jesus, you'll vote red. If you're a true follower of Jesus, you'll vote blue. Or if you're a true follower of Jesus, you won't even vote at all, right? All of this is out there. You'll be a libertarian because those are the policies that align with Jesus. And here's why. And are there a good long laundry list of reasons why you'll be a libertarian? Because those are the policies that align with Jesus? Yes. But also you'll be a socialist because those are the policies that align with Jesus. And here's the big long list. Why? You'll be a conservative because those are the policies that align with Jesus. And here's why. You'll be an anarchist because those are the policies that align with Jesus. Every opposing political ideology can make their case. And here's the truth. I think just about every opposing political ideology can make a fairly convincing case as to why God is on their side and that they have the position of Jesus, right? I have friends who run the libertarianchristians.com website. It's interesting. Check it out. I have friends who will not rest until every aspect of society is fully socialized, all of whom claim to be Christ followers and who, by the way, are very legitimate Christ followers. All of these people. Jesus constantly taught and demonstrated that the kingdom was not like the world. And here's what all of these political ideologies seek to do as they gain and use power to affect and shape the world, often for good reasons and for good causes that we should get behind. But this means that the power structures of the world are not going to be what make the kingdom of God possible. Conservatism in its finest and purest form is not going to make the kingdom of God possible. Socialism, communism, libertarianism, in all of their fullest and most perfect forms, if they were instituted across the board, are not going to make the kingdom of God possible. The kingdom of God has spread through over 2 millennia of every kind of social structure and culture. It exists fully in every form of human institution. It exists, has existed with kings and despots, in communism and democracy, in autocracies. It has existed with Caesars, with remote tribes, and more. The kingdom of God is not dependent upon the political structure that rules us. The kingdom does not need a government to thrive. So no matter which side you stand on, and stand on a side, that's great. Don't mistake your politics, which are important, for your kingdom identity. Don't replace or mistake our kingdoms with God's kingdom. Because our world and our political systems, regardless of what they are, says power is necessary. And Jesus is the one who says the first will be last, and the last will be first. Who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Go read Matthew 18. those who are like children. And what do children understand about our endless political wranglings? Our political culture calls us to the defeat of our ideological enemies. That's the culture war that we live in right now. And all of you are familiar with that. But what does Jesus do? Jesus gently ushers us to wash the feet of even those who would betray us. That's Jesus' system. Our politics say to hate those whose agenda is different than ours. Jesus says, I died for them too. Now, in all of this, let me be clear. Don't ignore politics. Don't think that Jesus has called you to be apathetic about it either, right? Politics is important. Politics has very real implications on us and our lives. And the things that we do and the positions that we take and how these things are used, they have very real effects, right? And that's why it's important and why we should study them and be informed. But Jesus says, keep your eyes on the higher reality as well. This reality, which is the kingdom of God, is not built by our political structures or how perfect we get our political structures. It is not reliant on them either. Let your politics always reflect the mind, the character, and the heart of Christ, and the ways that you know are best and you believe are best. So be advocates politically of what you think Jesus would fight for. But always remember, Jesus was never dependent on that. And that's why he was not a political activist himself. Now, I need your accountability in this as much as anyone. You guys know that I have political leanings, and sometimes I express those political leanings, as well as some of you guys as well. And so it's easy to intertangle these things. It's easy to get caught in them. It's easy to unintentionally project the message that to be a follower of Jesus, you need to also have these certain political leanings. Right? So let's hold each other accountable to that. And I think we can do that. I think we can do that well. That's why we have this community. But it's the kingdom of God that we fight ultimately for. And it's God who has fought for us. Right? It's God who gave us everything, so that we can have the luxury of having political opinions, right? He gave it all for us, and that's what we're going to transition into now and think about now with David. Go ahead, David.